Greg Prato, welcome back. What's up, Greg?
Hello, Eric. How you doing? Thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's great to have you back. And for this one, Ratt, World
Rat.
Infestation, the Ratt Story. And this is told by a bunch of different people, members of the band, people who knew the band. Tell us about all the people you spoke with for this book and the contributions, too, from Mitch Lafon.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, earlier on in my writing career, back in the early 2000s, I did a large feature for Classic Rock magazine, which covered the whole entire Rat history. And for that article, I interviewed all the surviving members, which is Stephen Pearcy, Warren DeMartini, Juan Crucier, and also Bobby Blotzer. And then a few years later, I interviewed Warren for another book of mine about MTV called MTV Ruled the World, which focused on the early years of music video. Then last year, when Rat put out their box set, I did brand new interviews with Stephen Pearcy, and I did a huge two-part interview with Juan for two different sites I write for. And after I did that, I think maybe one of the fans of my books might have emailed me or messaged me and said, did you ever think of doing a book about Rat? And then I realized with all the interviews I've done with all the members, that right there in itself is just a book, just waiting to be written. So I looked back at all the quotes. All the quotes were good, covered the whole entire history. And then I realized, let me go back, and I was able to get some classic magazine articles. So there were like modern day quotes mixed with older quotes. I did a few exclusive interviews for this book, such as Bunny Carlos from Cheap Trick, because not too many people realize Cheap Trick during one of their lower points of their popularity, which is kind of hard to believe because Cheap Trick at this point is considered like one of the greatest rock bands of all time, which I
Yeah.
totally agree with. In 1986, they were at a low point, and they actually had to open up for Rat on a tour of arenas. I also interviewed Ricky Rackman because he also crossed paths with Rat, and I also interviewed Don Jameson for some comic relief, and also he is a legitimate fan of heavy metal, so he had some interesting things to say.
Definitely, definitely. And
Mitch Lafon, who is the host of a podcast, he did one of the last ever interviews, extensive interviews with Robbin Crosby, and I'm friendly with Mitch, so I got in contact with him and I said, "Hey, can I use your interview?" And he said, "By all means." So I was able to use that whole entire interview, which was very, very nice of Mitch, because that was such a revealing interview. That was one of the most revealing interviews I've probably ever read. I mean, Mitch got Robbin at a point where he just wanted to come clean and just tell the truth from his point of view. So I was able to include that. So I think I have written the definitive story about Rat, to be honest with you.
I would say so. When was that interview with Crosby? Do you
I believe
remember?
that was 2001. I think he passed away in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, and it was like I think just a few months before he passed.
Wow.
Yeah, he was sadly in very bad shape health-wise. He had AIDS. He was very, very badly overweight because he had some kind of condition that he couldn't, I think, metabolize food correctly or something like that. And it's sad because he even said during the interview, he says, like, I don't eat badly. I don't eat a lot of food. It's just that my food's not being broken up correctly. It's sad that he had all
Yeah.
these. Yeah, it was a very sad ending to his life when you look back
Yeah.
at
It
it.
was a sobering moment when he came out and talked about it, and a wake up call to a lot of the people that because he got it through drug use. I believe that's
Drug
how he
use, I
got it,
believe. Yeah,
right?
he
Needles.
was addicted to heroin. And again, it's sad because like Freddie Mercury, if he was diagnosed with it maybe just a few years later, like now they're able to, I think, treat AIDS patients with like drugs and stuff like that. Like they know what to do.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess up to like the mid to late 90s, it was still kind of like hit or miss, or they just didn't know what they were doing with medication.
One thing that's interesting about Rat, and I didn't realize this probably maybe until the 90s, that they go back to the 70s Sunset Strip scene. Like I thought early 80s they formed and playing on Sunset Strip, but they go back to like the days of Van Halen and Don Dokken and
Well, yeah, well, what it is, they started out as a band called, they were called Mickey Rat, and that was named after a adult comic book, and that was from the 70s. They're originally based in San Diego, though. They don't move. Steven doesn't come to LA until I think the dawn of 1980. And then he hooks up with Jakey Lee, who is also originally from San Diego. And he then he basically moved Rat from San Diego to LA. And the reason why he moved is because he saw Van Halen in the late 70s before they were even signed. So I guess that must have been 76 or 77. and he realized something was going on, and he said, "There's like I have to go to LA because that's where it's all happening. If there's bands like Van Halen, because I guess San Diego wasn't as rich a scene as far as metal and hard rock went. So he very wisely took a move, and it obviously paid off for him.
Yeah, a friend of his told him you got to check this band out, and then he went there. And then the other thing that's interesting, none of the guys are from Los Angeles,
Right.
right? That's the other thing.
No, none of them are. They're all transplants. It's true.
How does the lineup come together? That the
It's
original lineup, because there are some guys in and out like Jakey Lee, which is fascinating
yeah,
too. Future Ozzy Osbourne guitarist.
right. And then also something I learned from the book I totally forgot about is Jakey Lee was briefly a member of Dio before he was an Ozzy, which
Yes.
I kind of knew about that, but I forgot about that. So that, going through I was lucky to get my hands, like I said, get my hands on some older hit paraders and Kerrangs and circus magazines. So it took me back, and I was able to get some good quotes from that, put it all in perspective. But yeah, what happened was all of Ratt members, it seems like a lot of people, whether it was the band Poison, whether it was Ratt, a lot of guys came from out of town to LA. And I don't know, it was probably because of Van Halen, because Van Halen was really the first metal or hard rock band from LA to hit it big in the late 70s. Quiet Riot wasn't well known because their albums just came out in Japan. It wasn't until 83 that they hit it big. So I guess it was Van Halen just attracted all these bands to LA. I mean, even Nikki Sixx isn't even from LA originally. He was from Seattle, I believe. Duff from Guns N' Roses isn't from LA. He's from Seattle. So a lot of the guys that wound up hitting it big in the 80s were not from LA, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, so they all form, and then that's the interesting thing too. Like the guys look back and they got different versions of the story as far as who wanted Warren DeMartini, right? That was the other thing. Who called him and said, "Hey, we want you to join the band"? I think there were
Right.
two different
Well,
versions. There's
yeah, and
Crosby's
also
story
something,
and Stephen's
right.
story.
And I also interviewed George Lynch for the he's quoted in the book, and he says how it was a very incestuous scene at the time. How at one point Warren was playing guitar in Dokken and George was in Ratt, even though they were previously in the bands that we know them with. Meaning Warren was in Ratt, and then George was in Dokken, and then they switched. Then at one point they were in a rehearsal studio, and they met in the hallway, and they're like, "What the hell are we doing? Like, you belong in this band, I belong in that band," and they just switched, which is kind of funny. But he just yeah, and then like also Juan was in Dokken. He played on the Breaking the Chains album. So yeah, it's kind of funny how it was a very incestuous scene at the time with guys playing in the bands that were like rotating around.
And what was the name of the house that the guys from Motley Crue hung out with the guys from Ratt? Right? Wasn't that Stephen's
All right,
apartment
yeah,
that they all?
they had a gang called the Gladiators.
Yeah.
And they said it wasn't like a gang that they would go and like mug people or stuff like that. It was just like a party type gang. But something that people talk a little bit about though, there was a divide in the early '80s on the Sunset Strip. In the very early '80s, punk and new wave was the most popular type of music. There's a great documentary called Decline of Western Civilization, not to be confused with Decline of Western Civilization Part Two. This is Part One from 1980 or 81. It came out, and it's one of the best documentaries. It focuses on like Black Flag, the Germs, the Circle Jerks. It's a fantastic documentary. I actually prefer that one more than the heavy metal one. The heavy metal one is kind of like a goof, kind of, but the first one I think is fantastic. It's directed by the same person, Penelope Spears.
Right. Right.
But my point is that heavy metal was not the popular type of music that was playing all the clubs in say 1980, 81. It was punk. It was Black Flag, Circle Jerks, those bands. It wasn't until Motley Crue in 81 starts to break through. Then it turned back to metal. It was like hard rock and metal in the late 70s with Quiet Riot and early version of Dokken, Van Halen. Then it went to punk. Then with Motley Crue and bands like Dubrow and Great White, then it slowly started to go back to metal in the early '80s on the
Yeah.
Sunset.
Quiet Riot with the number one album, Metal Health, and then also Us Festival. I think was played a role in Ratt. Finally, they were like one of the last bands from that Sunset Strip scene to get signed. I believe in the
Yes,
book it
yeah, they
talks
were,
about.
and I think Bobby Blotzer is quoted in the book as saying that they were kind of down in the dumps because all their friends were getting signed and all their friends were having success, and it seemed like Ratt was going to be left behind. But luckily, they were able to put it all together. And like I say in the book, some people tend to overlook for a period of time, Ratt was without question one of the top hard rock heavy metal bands here in the States. In 1984, they were more popular than even Motley Crue. Invasion of Your Privacy charted higher and sold more than Shout at the Devil. The song Round and Round was a top 10 hit, or I go into it was either top 10 or top 15. I forget.
I have it here. I
And
think it's top
no
10.
Motley Crue. What's that?
Oh no, you know what? Let's see. Round and Round was
Was it 12?
12.
12. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
And Motley Crue didn't, I think they peaked at number 40 with Looks That Kill. That was the highest they got. Then a year later, Ratt tours arenas and their opening band is none other than Bon Jovi. So
Yeah.
that just puts in perspective how 84, 85, even early 86, Ratt is up there with Motley Crue, Kiss, Iron Maiden, Ozzy, like the top hard rock metal bands.
Yeah, 85. The Rat logo was inspired by Kiss.
Yep, we learned that from the book. Yeah, yeah. Stephen talks about that. He went for the block letters kind of look, which it's funny. I never really put two and two together, but after I came across what he said, it actually makes sense.
Yeah. Producer Bo Hill, his work with Rat, well known, but that was kind of a chance at the time that Atlantic took to have him work on Out of the Cellar. He had only produced some obscure acts, Airborne and Shanghai. You mentioned in the
Yeah,
book, I've never heard of them.
he was actually a band. He was a member of those bands, and I think he may have produced maybe just one or two things prior to that.
But
So he
that decision pays off, as we know.
does. It
Yeah.
does pay off. The only thing that I will say, listening back to the Ratt albums today, it is a bit dated sounding, but then again, a lot of the 80s hard rock and metal albums are. But their first EP, that to me is my favorite Ratt sound and approach. It's very raw. It's definitely the hardest rock sounding album. In fact, Robbin Crosby says that's his favorite sounding Ratt. He felt that's the way they should have stayed. But then again, you could look at the other side of the coin is if they didn't maybe go for the Bo Hill glossy type production, they wouldn't have scored such a big hit with Round and Round. So
Yeah, that
it's
was the sound of the time for sure.
exactly.
I listened to a bunch of Rat over the weekend after I read the book, and they had such a great groove. And Stephen Pearcy, his vocals, they're so unique. You know right away that it's him. But also I noticed he was in the pocket, in the verses. It's like he just fit right in there, man, like a glove. It was just they had this chemistry, which is the irony of that is that that all of their personalities were so different. Five, I think you write in the book, 5 different personalities, extremely different, but they had this chemistry musically that I think that it set them aside from a lot of the bands that I guess you lump the unfair label, 80s rock bands. Not a lot of talent there, but these guys had some skills, like on Round and Round, the drum work, the double bass pedal, all that stuff. It's just so cool.
Well, I think Warren DeMartini is one of the most underrated metal guitarists from that era. The thing is, you could make the argument Seattle in the early 90s gave us so many great singers. You could make the argument that in the 80s, the Sunset Strip gave us so many great guitarists. And I mean, singers with grunge that you hear like a few seconds of Lane Staley, it's him. A few seconds of Chris Cornell, it's him. The same with guitarists from the Sunset Strip. They all put their own unique thing. You could hear a little bit of George Lynch, it's him, Jakey Lee, Eddie Van Halen, of course, Randy Rhoads, Warren DeMartini. You just hear just a little bit of them. And the thing that the guitarists I just mentioned, they're considered shredders pretty much, but the thing that made Warren DeMartini so great, and of course also Eddie Van Halen, they could shred, but the majority of their solos aren't shredding solos. They're melodic. You could sing along to them. They fit the song perfectly. They all put the importance of the song above shredding away, which I think is like horribly missed nowadays. And now it's just all a generation of gymnastics and how fast you can play and how many strings you have in your guitar and how expensive your guitar is. People tend to overlook that Eddie Van Halen was playing a crap guitar that he just slapped together himself,
Much more than how many notes you play. That's for sure. The song Round and Round, there was quite a few comments that you get on this song. interesting stuff about the creation of the song. What do you recall? And I have the book up in front of me here. If we need a reminder, just some of the things that they talked about the creation of that song. I believe, who was it that influenced? Was it Zappa that influenced the
No,
riff?
that's
That's a
actually the
different one.
song
That's Way
called
Cool Junior.
that is Way Cool Junior.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. So
yeah,
round
but
and round though, there's some
round and round.
interesting.
Yeah. So what happened was Warren DeMartini was living in he was squatting in in some kind of I guess apartment that no one was in or some kind of building, and they somehow had electricity. They must have because they were able to jam and work out songs there. So that was where he came up with the riff to the song Round and Round, and then Marshall Burrell, who we know from the early days of course, Van Halen. He was Van Halen's manager up to what, Van Halen 2, I think, right?
Yeah, I think they got
Noel Monk.
Noel Monk, maybe even before that.
I think it was
But
after the first Van Halen tour wrapped up. I
yeah,
think they went to him and said, "We want you to be the manager."
yep,
Yeah, but anyway, he wound up eventually managing Ratt, and he even Ratt's first EP was on Time Coast Recorders, which was an indie label through Marshall Burrell. And anyway, Marshall Burrell was the nephew of Milton Berle, who was a TV legend from the 50s. And they were able to get him involved in video, and he's a big star. He was the star in the video for Round and Round. He plays a man and also a woman in that video.
yes, Uncle
Yeah,
Milty.
yeah, Uncle Milty, exactly.
Then interesting the part where Steven sings. I knew right from the beginning that you would end up winning. That was a part that Robbin contributed to. Um, what else? Let's see.
Oh, also something else that's interesting about that song is they were trying to work out a solo as far as when it came to who was going to play what with the song's guitar solo, and Robbin was having difficulty coming up with something, and he was like, Warren, you just play the whole thing. And Warren, to his credit, was like, no, let's work something out. How about I'll start with the solo, and then why don't you and I work out like a dual harmony type thing? And that's one of the standout points of the song for me personally,
Yeah,
is that dual harmony. So if it
yeah,
wasn't for that, that kind of give and take between both of them, we
and
wouldn't have had that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
that's the song that launches Rad. Like we said, number 12 single. The album top 10, I believe that was number 7.
I was going to say number 7, yeah.
Yeah. Now tell me about Bo Hill and Stephen Pearcy's vocals. He had him always do 3 takes, and then he had him start singing the end of the song.
Yeah, that was kind
That
of
was
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, that's something that I've never really heard anyone say before, that he would start Steven singing towards the end of the song to have him warm up his voice, and then he would go to the beginning. And then also something that they would do with his vocal takes, which is now pretty commonplace. I know this is much more common when it comes to solos with guitar. I know, for instance, like what they would do is they would have a few takes, and they would just take like one part of one take, say from like take one, then another part from take two, take one, take three. They would kind of they would edit it all together. I know that Richie Blackmore did his solos that way. Alex Lifeson has told me they also did that with also Rush, that actually he would, which is pretty trusting, he would let Geddy Lee pretty much just decide what was going to be what. I recently interviewed him. He said he would just leave the room after he did a few takes with guitar solos and just let Terry Brown, the producer, and also Geddy Lee just decide what went with what. So he wouldn't even know what the solo would wind up sounding like. And it's pretty crazy when you think of classic solos like, Limelight and also Tom Sawyer, that theoretically that's probably like a few different solos that are all different parts.
Yeah. There's an early version of Round and Round too that I wonder if it's out there somewhere. There's a couple different versions that they played live before they recorded it. I wonder if those are out there somewhere.
Yeah, I was able to come across, interestingly, I was able to come across a few interesting bootlegs while I was doing the book, and then they just vanished. So I don't know why or who took them down, but
Oh, so they were on YouTube, but then got pulled?
they
Okay.
were on YouTube. There was a good one of them in, I think, Pasadena from 82, 83, which was good. They do an early version of I think it's Back for More, and it has the extra part in it that was on the EP that was deleted from the version on Out of the Cellar. So you hear that. And they also do, I believe, Round and Round, and there's slightly different lyrics, and I think there's even like a different part in there. So it's interesting to hear the embryonic versions of some of those songs.
Yeah, that'd make a cool box set,
Yeah,
but they just released a box set, which we'll get to. That
they
was
did.
something that you mentioned in the book.
Yep.
So Out of the Cellar, huge hit. And then they follow with 1985's Invasion of Your Privacy, the top 40 Lay It Down, and then You're in Love. Also,
Mhm.
I believe was that might have been top 42. Two hits from the album, number 7 album, two platinum plus albums to their credit. They're headlining arenas now. The year 1985, Ratt is at the peak of its popularity, but it seems like this is the beginning of problems within the band. During the tour with Bon Jovi opening, Robbin notices his bandmates just complaining a lot. Ego's getting bigger. The drugs and alcohol start to become a problem around this time.
Right. Yep. He talks. I mean, at the time, they in the press were making it seem like that it was all for one for all, pretty much. But then when you go back and hear that interview with that Mitch Lafon did with Robbin, it's not that way at all. He says how the writing for that album, it started that they went on a band vacation to Hawaii and they brought all their families with them. And it just so happened that whatever hotel they were staying at, they didn't have enough space for Robbin. So it was the whole entire band at one hotel. And then the other hotel that wasn't that close had Robbin by himself. So there wasn't that much hanging out or that much like camaraderie as previously. And he said that that was when the beginning of the end kind of happened. 'Cause I think that's when he started dabbling with heroin. And also, it just seemed it just for whatever reason things, I guess maybe they just weren't on the same page or what exactly happened. But he also feels that they were a little bit rushed with that album. And then as the albums go on, he feels they were even more rushed, especially the third album that we'll get to, Dancing Undercover.
Yeah.
That was definitely rushed. But yeah, I
And
mean,
Robbin was dating Tawny Katane, but at this time she's also on the first two album covers for Rat, isn't she?
yeah, he
Or
was
no,
dating.
she's on the EP, and
Yeah,
then
that's her legs on the EP. She's on the cover of Out of the Cellar, and she's in the video for the song called Back for More. She's actually the head starlet in the
yeah,
video.
yeah, it's amazing. Neither of them are around. They both passed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sad.
they were tight too. Like they were really close. She had great things to say about him in that documentary. I think there was some magic there because we know she was with David Coverdale in later years, but she seemed to really care about him, and they were together for quite a long time. I think it was
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point they weren't even boyfriend girlfriend. I think they just stayed friends because I know he also dated the actress Apollonia from the movie
yeah,
Purple Rain. She was in
yeah,
with Prince, and then he winds up marrying a Playboy playmate, Lori Carr, I believe is her name, around 86. So that's all kind of like in the same time. But yeah, but he seemed like he always remained on good terms with Tawny Katane, and like you said in the VH1 Behind the Music, she had nothing but very positive things to say about Robbin.
yeah. World Infestation, the Rat Story. It's out now. And we have the author of the book, Greg Prato, to talk about the book and Rats, that third album, Dancing Undercover from 1986. The quotes from Robin, they paint the picture of a band that's really heading towards big trouble now. Warren's not happy that Steven and Robin are getting on the cover of the magazines and that they're interviewed more than he is, but really, Warren didn't talk much, right? He was kind of shy. So it just made more sense that the media would kind of gravitate towards those two guys. But he was kind of pissed off at that, right? And then there was a couple, what's that got to do with Rat moments? One
Right.
with Robin on Howard Stern, and then another with Steven and Playgirl.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, what happened was Robin went on Howard Stern with Steven, I believe, and they did an interview. And Howard Stern back in those days is a totally different interviewer than Howard Stern is now. He was very, shall we say, rough around the edges, and he was all about strippers and porno stars and things like that. So when he found out that Robbin Crosby had dated Tawny Katane, Apollonia, and he was, I think at the time, then just dating Lori Carr, the Playboy playmate. I think that's like all he wanted to talk about pretty much. And it kind of rubbed the rest of the band the wrong way. And then also on top of that, in 1986, the summer of 86, Stephen Piercy posed in Playgirl magazine, but was not naked though. He had a thong or some kind of thing that was covering his private parts.
Yeah, like a Burt Reynolds thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
but yes,
yeah.
but that's where things start to happen. This is, boy, this story, you hear it so many times over these bands. The jealousy and the riffs that start. How come he's on the cover of the
Yeah.
magazine, and why
Although,
isn't he?
one thing I will say, and I point this out in the book, is that's a little bit of it's not totally true because in early 1987, which would have been the Dancing Undercover era, Warren was on at least two guitar magazine covers, which I talk about in the book. He was the sole cover feature of a guitar player magazine in early 87, and then him and Jakey Lee were together on a cover of Guitar for the Practicing Musician, also in early 1987. So it's not totally correct that he wasn't getting press because he actually was.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, again, five very different personalities all trying to work together, and they were
But the
able
thing
to.
is, that's what makes bands like that great. You need the push and pull and people not necessarily getting together. That's what makes all the bands great. That's what made Kiss great, the Police great, the Rolling Stones great, the Kinks great, Van Halen with David Lee Roth. I mean, you can't. Sometimes bands all get along, sometimes they don't, but that's how it seems like the best music is made.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Dancing Undercover still successful. Dance was a top 40 single, and the album reaches number 26, but it still underperformed as far as the band and the label was concerned. They were hoping this was going to be where they reached that next level. And then Warren's quoted in the book about the album saying it wasn't a bad album, but could have been better. The band had the chance to really break it bigger than before, but it was just that you were mentioning it. They rushed through it too
Rush,
much, or
yeah.
they were being rushed.
Being rushed, and also you can tell from Invasion of Your Privacy on, as each album goes along further, it has more and more filler material. Like the EP, all of the EP was great. I'd say pretty much all of Invasion of Your Privacy was great, or at least strong that you could hear it, you could listen to the whole thing. Then with Invasion of Your Privacy, you could definitely point out or realize like, oh yeah, this is the single. I don't know what this song is. This song is a strong track. This is you could tell that they were starting to pad the albums, and it became very apparent on Dancing Undercover. I believe Bobby Blotzer is quoted as saying that he can't even listen to the second side of the album because he wasn't. I forget if he said he didn't like Steven's lyrics or it just sounded like it was rushed. And I remember Robbin Crosby also talks in the book about it. He only liked maybe like half the songs or just like a handful of songs. So
Detonator sounds like Def Leppard,
yeah,
the production.
there's a song on Reach for the Sky that actually starts with a Def Leppard sounding vocoder sound, which is the exact sound of the beginning of Love Bites, I believe.
Yeah, like
Like
Loving
the
You's a Dirty Job. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just, I noticed that was very similar to the Def Leppard sound. And
right.
that they also, I think Desmond Child played a role in that. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. And
But
I mean the thing too, which I'll just jump in quick, the thing that one, like of course now hindsight's 2020, but if Ratt would have gone back to their EP sound that was more rough and raw, it would have held up better and also fit in. I think it would have been more comparable to say Metallica and also Guns N' Roses, who at the time in the late 80s had more of a raw or at least more in your face type sound compared to say your Poisons and like what Kiss was doing at the time and Ozzy, where it was
yeah,
very glossy and poppy, you know.
I forgot to mention too, Warren, a lot younger than the rest of the guys in the band, wasn't he? He was like 18 and those guys were mid 20s
Yes, yeah.
when he joined.
When he was invited to join Ratt, he was still in high school. Stephen
Right.
Pierce called him and he told him, would you like to join Ratt? And Warren was like, yeah, let me just finish, my last semester of high school. And he's like, finish your
No.
last semester? I'm gonna come out tonight. Like, so
Yeah,
then,
yeah. We got a gig tomorrow,
yeah,
man.
yeah, right. And then he thought about it and he wound up going. One thing I did not find out. I wonder if Warren ever finished high school. I did not
Yeah.
find that out. Maybe
Yeah.
once I ever speak to him, I'll ask him that.
Ton of great photos between chapters 8 and 9 in the book. I mean, a
Yes.
ton of them. I mean, yeah, there's so many good. Chapter 10, titled Reach for the Sky. This is when we get into the late 80s and 1988's Reach for the Sky, featuring Way Cool Jr., which is one of my all time favorites. I Want a Woman's on there too. Tell me about the creation of Way Cool Jr., one of my favorite Ratt tunes. Warren told you this is the one, the Frank Zappa influence, right?
Yes, he became friends with Dweezil Zappa. And of course, that is the son of the legendary Frank Zappa. And Dweezil at the time was pretty popular. He was a VJ on MTV. He had a album out that had a video that was also being played at the time. So I remember watching him on MTV and him introducing a Ratt video and him even saying like, "This is one of my favorite guitarists, Warren DeMartini." And then he became friends with Warren, maybe through that. And he would bring Warren to meet his father because I think Dweezil still lived at home. And Frank played a little guitar thing, and it influenced or it inspired Warren to come up with the part that is featured in the song Way Cool Jr.
That's cool. Warren DeMartini is a great guitarist name. That's his real name too, isn't it?
I believe it is. I believe
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Something else I just wanted to you talked about the pictures in the book. I just want to give a shout out to the photographer Christopher Lee Helton. He's the gentleman that did the pictures on the cover. Would you happen to have the cover handy right now, Eric?
Yeah, I could put it up on the screen if we
There you
put
go.
up a video, but really, I mean, phenomenal shots.
Yeah,
I'm just looking through them here.
he took great photos of the band on the Invasion tour, the Out of
Opening
the
for
Cellar
Billy
tour.
Squire in
Yes, opening
1984.
for Billy Squire. Yep. Yeah. Also dancing undercover. He also took great photos of them playing some like softball game or something like that. So I got lucky that I was able to get in contact with Christopher and he let me use a lot of his classic photos, which a lot of them I never even saw. And I remember reading a lot of Ratt articles back in the day, and I never saw a lot of those photos before. So
Yeah. See,
it's definitely
see
hard
Juan
to
doing
sort
his
out.
moves, right? They always tease him with Juan
Right.
doing
Yeah.
the dance or what is a spin around
Yeah, right,
the
right. Yeah.
bass.
Yeah, Juan used to do a lot of flamboyant stage moves and
Yeah.
which is kind of weird because when I interview him, he's very laid back, very friendly. Like he's not a flamboyant party. He doesn't strike me as that. But I asked him how he came up with that, and he said that he had a background in karate and how some of the moves were karate influenced or karate based or something like that. So
Like a David Lee Roth on bass. And
a little bit. You can see
and Robbin was super tall, man. That
he
dude
was
was like, oh, it was he like 6'5" or
something like that. Yeah. That's why
yeah.
he got the name King, Robbin
Okay.
King Crosby. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, look, there's a picture of Steven doing a Roth kick here, a David Lee
That's right.
kick.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
December of 85. Yeah, let's talk about the lyrics to Wake Cool Jr. You thought it was Axl Rose. I always thought it was Frank Sinatra. I don't
Oh, interesting.
I thought
Okay.
I heard that somewhere. Who is it about?
When I asked Steven that, he said it's not about anybody in particular. I always thought it was Axl Rose because that came out in late '88, and that was when Guns N' Roses just became super duper stars. And they were all over MTV and everything. So that was who I thought it was about. But no, Steven told me that it is not about anybody in particular. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I thought I heard or read Frank Sinatra somewhere. Interesting. Yeah. So we get the answer to that in the book. The album reached number 17. Interesting to read how Robbin Crosby started producing. And then Steven, he gets to live out his childhood fantasy by becoming a race car driver. He got into it with Vince Neil of Motley Crue, which that made me think about when Vince was on a Motley Crue in 91,
Mm.
92, whatever it was, when he was on MTV. He's talking about, well, they got rid of me because they say I was more interested in racing cars. I'll never forget that. So
Right.
it's interesting. So him and Steven were racing cars. I didn't know that. And then going back to Robbin, you noticed some interesting things that were said by him during interviews that hinted at his drug problems. Talk about that.
Yeah, he going back to some of the interviews he did in Circus and things like that. He associated being on stage with like I forget what amount of either snorting cocaine or doing heroin or something like that, which
Yeah,
I've
I can
read that
find
now.
it.
I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a weird, that's not something that you would really read. Wasn't that common to read that back in the late 80s in a Circus magazine article?
It's
So
almost like he
that
was intentionally slipping in those. I'm trying to find. Let's see. That would be. Let's see. Is it chapter 10? Is that in? No. Let's
yeah, it's
see.
either in the Reach for the Sky chapter or
Oh,
the
here we go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Rereading some of this is in chapter 10. Rereading some of Crosby's quotes from back in the day, he makes reference to drug use more than many might remember, such as the time he was quoted as saying, "The highlights keep getting higher, and it's not over yet. Playing Madison Square Garden, the Forum, and full stadiums in Japan, it's all like heroin. There's no other high like it." And then let's see what else. This might be a quote I think from Mitch's interview. He says, "Reach for the Sky got bad for me because I got real strung out because we had all that time off. Plus, there was a lot of animosity and everybody was doing their family thing. We sort of drifted apart. And when we got to doing it again, I know a lot of us were really ready to get back into it and get away from the domestic bullshit, which I was never cut out for. I should have known from the beginning that getting married and shit just was not me." Who did he marry? He didn't marry Tawny Katane, though. That
No,
was,
he married Lori Carr, who was
yeah,
the
okay.
Playboy Playmate, and they were only married for a few years and they wound up getting divorced.
Okay. So that last album that Robbins a part of would be Reach for the Sky, right?
Well, no,
That's, or he was on Detonator.
he was on Detonator, but his role in the band was definitely diminishing because he was at
Yeah.
that point. I think the band knew he had a bad drug problem, so he tried to go into rehab. That album too was a bit of a misfire because some of the band wanted to be raw, and they wound up hooking up with none other than Desmond Child, who, I mean, Desmond Child is great if you're trying to write a top 40 pop rock metal hit at that time. I mean, there's no denying the success he had with Bon Jovi at the time. But if you're trying to get a raw rock sound, Desmond Child is not the producer you'd want to go with. And they wound up going with him, and they wound up with a very poppy, glossy album, which in late 1990, that's when Faith No More, The Real Thing is a big hit. Soundgarden is just kind of stirring a little bit. Jane's Addiction just put out Ritual de lo Habitual, and that's also a surprise hit. So that was not the time to start keep putting out pop metal things. That would have been the time to get a little more raw, a little bit more direct.
You interviewed Desmond, didn't you? You asked
I
him
did.
about, because you said to him, it's one of those albums that people don't talk about a lot. What did you think of it? Right? Didn't he comment on that album himself? I think he was happy with it.
Yeah, he didn't go too deep into it. He just said that he just admitted that the band was in a bit they were experiencing a lot of turmoil about what was going on with Robbin, that Robbin wasn't as involved as he once was. And I know Robbin talks in the book that he was in rehab at some point during the making of it, and he was hurt that supposedly not more band members went to visit him.
Yeah.
But then he talks about at one point some of the members, or one or two members, went with Desmond to meet him in rehab and talk to him. And so they did at least go once, according to Robbin, but
Yeah. Desmond not only wrote songs, but he produced it.
co-produced it.
Yeah. Co-producer with Arthur
Yes,
Payson.
yes.
And then it's interesting, John Bon Jovi, backing vocals on Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. Michael Schenker, he's on Shame, Shame, Shame. It says tag on Shame, Shame. I don't know what that means, but I guess he contributes guitar to that track. Yeah. Yeah. Loving You is a Dirty Job. I love that song. It's a great song. It went gold. The album went gold.
I was going to say, I'll be honest, that was the first Rat album I did not buy.
Yeah.
Just
Well, yeah, because everybody
yeah.
was kind of steering
At that point,
away.
at that point, I was kind of, I started to listen because, like, in the mid to late 80s, all I listened to was really heavy metal and also hard rock. I was maybe a little bit different than some of the heavy metal fans that I went back into the 60s and 70s, and I loved Jimi Hendrix and Mountain and early Alice Cooper and things like that. Robin Trower, I love the Bridge of Sighs album. I remember listening to that a lot at the time. Grand Funk, like those bands. But late in the 80s and definitely by 1990, at that point, I'm listening to other styles of music. I still like hard rock and heavy metal, but yeah, just who knows? I mean, again, if Rat was maybe a little bit more raw and a little bit more like their early albums, maybe I would have stuck it out. But at
Yeah.
that
Well,
point, I was just so burnt out on like what pop metal and hair metal sounded like. I just didn't want to hear any more of it.
yeah. And as we know, what happens to Rat in the 90s, everything just falls apart, but not just for Rat, just for all those bands from that era. But if people can get the story more in detail by getting your book, but if you can give a brief summary of what happens with Rat in the 90s and into the 2000s, because they did get back together in the late 90s, but then that fell apart. And then there's lawsuits. And I
Right.
remember Steven being replaced by a new singer. I remember seeing them live, and it just wasn't the same thing. And then there was one version of Rat with Bobby Blotzer, another version of Rat with Steve. I mean, let's start with, I guess, the 90s. They break up around what, 92 or 3?
Early 92, I believe. What happened
Okay.
is they tried to tour in support of the album Detonator, and it was horrible. They wound up taking out they had an advance for a big merch deal that they took the money and then the tour wasn't selling well. They were playing to like half sold out, I mean, half full arenas, and they then had to owe the money back or something like that. So that was stressful. Then on top of it, you have Robbin struggling with drug addiction to the point that he winds up leaving the band mid-tour. He's replaced by Michael Schenker. Then for some reason, now you'd think if you have Michael Schenker in the band, you would want to feature him throughout the show, but for some weird reason, and even Steven says, still don't understand why we did this. They play half the show with just one guitarist, which is just Warren. They have a keyboardist playing. Then halfway through the show, Michael Schenker comes out. So like, why are you
Oh my
wasting Michael
God.
Schenker? It
Talk
just
about
makes like no,
underused. I mean,
and
that's and
why and like
Schenker's
why
a
is there a keyboardist in Ratt too? That
yeah.
Ratt's the main thing I think of with Ratt besides Steven's vocals is the whole two guitars playing off each other. You
Yeah, and
know
Schenker had name value too
exactly. So you would I don't know why yeah. So anyway, so
from
that
UFO fame. Yeah.
right, exactly. Yeah, they even covered Lights Out on that
Did
tour.
they really? Oh
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
wow.
there's
Okay.
a cool clip of it on YouTube that you can
Oh, I
check
gotta
out.
check it out.
Oh yeah. But then what happens
So
is so that tour bombs. They put out a greatest hits album, which is a sin that they put 5 songs off of the Detonator album on it, which
Rat and Roll 81 to 91, right?
yes,
That's the
which
one. Okay.
they only put 2 songs off of Invasion of Your Privacy, which was a big hit, and they put so it's 2 songs off that, and then 5 songs off of Detonator, which was
Oh my God. Yeah, I'm
not
looking
their
at the
best. That
track
that was
listing.
that was clearly someone at the record label trying to hope that one of those songs would catch on or something like that, you know. But
Yeah.
they wind up breaking up in early '92 because of everything that's going on. There's a lot of friction and fighting, and then, like you said, they get back together in the late '90s, but without Juan and without Robbin, because Robbin is very bad off health wise, and he's still badly addicted to drugs. In
Yeah,
fact,
and
it's
keep
said
in mind
that
too, because the behind the music ran around that time, right? Isn't
Behind the Music was in the early
oh that was
2000s.
early 2000s.
Yeah, what
Okay.
happened, which was interesting, which they decided they were going to do a Behind the Music in the early 2000s. They filmed Robbins' segment, then they shelved it for some reason because it went 1 or 2 years, and during that interim period is when Robin sadly passed away. Then the surviving members then get on board, and then they finish it off, and they were able to use Robin's parts, which when I spoke to Juan, he said he's very thankful because it's like, nice that he wound up being involved too, and it's kind of like seeing
Okay.
an old friend that he was able to at least share his viewpoints and everything in
All
that.
right.
But
Now, what's the album? So 1999, they have an album that comes out. It's often referred to as 1999.
yeah,
So
which is
this
really just a self-titled album.
okay. So
Yeah,
who's this is Stephen Warren, Robbie, and
that's
okay, Robbie
Stephen.
Crane on bass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Stephen, Bobby Blotzer, and Warren are the only three Rat members from the classic Rat lineup. And that album was okay. I mean, again, at that point, I'm not really listening to that style of music that much. The album they put out years later with Carlos Cavazo on guitar, that I thought was on par with Rat in the '80s, and it was more of a raw production. So like I listened to that, and I'm thinking, oh, this is what Rat should have been going for in the late '80s. That would have, I think, probably aged better. And also,
Is that Infestation you're talking about?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that is a
exactly,
really good album.
exactly.
Best of
And all,
Me is the single,
yep, yep.
really good track.
And something else, I went back and listened to a lot of the solo material that Stephen Pearcy did. Stephen Pearcy did solo band in the '90s. He did a industrial type band, and then he did a thing called Arcade, and
Arcade, yeah.
he did 1 or 2 solo albums. I went back and listened to, and again, it was a very dry production, very straight ahead, and there's just no comparison. So that to me is the biggest mistake with Rat is I wish their '80s albums had a more raw, in-your-face production. Because whenever I hear what they did later on, it just sounds just like so much better, and it's not dated, and it I think showcases his voice better, the guitars, the riffs, everything.
Yeah, he had the bands Fire Dome, Crystal Pistol, Arcade, Vicious Delight, and
Vicious
Vertex.
Delight, I think, is the one I'm talking about.
Is
Yeah.
it okay? Because Vertex, I thought saw one on
I was
Vertex.
gonna
I
say,
think
or
is
maybe it's actually Vertex. I don't know.
it's like Nine Inch Nails type of
That must
thing.
be the industrial thing. And then, like I said, also Arcade, I remember came out in the mid '90s, I think.
Yeah. So Okay, so then there's a bunch of lawsuits about who owns the rights to the name.
The name, yeah, and then you have a couple of, well, what's funny and actually kind of sad, they were Rat was not the only band from the Sunset Strip that had two different Rats touring at the same time. During that era, I think you had two LA Guns touring, you had two Great Whites
Yep.
touring, or actually, I
Still,
think right now you have two Great Whites
still,
touring.
yeah, still do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And now, sadly, well, I mean, now what happened? I mean, we're skipping ahead, but now with Rat, there's no Rat band touring. It's Steven solo, and now Bobby Blotzer is going to go out. I forget what the name is, but it's something
Yeah,
Rat.
Bobby Blotzer's Rat Attack.
Okay, there you go. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. So now we don't really, I mean, these guys, they do not like Bobby. The Stephen, Juan, and Warren, but also Warren doesn't like Stephen. I don't know what. There's a
Yeah, no,
huge soap
it's
opera
very
there.
hard to get a read on who doesn't get along with who. I mean, really, it comes down to money because they have been able to get together every so often for tours or albums. I mean, again, it's the same, similar to the whole Van Halen, David Lee Roth, and also Sammy Hagar thing that it seems like why can't grown men just put aside their differences and act like adults and
Skid
just like
Row.
we're gonna split everything equally and
Yeah.
we'll take either separate tour buses and stay in separate hotels because something that Ricky Rackman says in the book, which I totally agree with, that stadium tour that happened a couple years ago with Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Poison, and Joan Jett. I love Joan Jett, but I think or Ricky says Rat should have been the band,
Oh
not
man,
not Joan Jett. That would have made the most sense
that
because
would have been perfect.
yeah, because Rat was more like a glam metal, hair metal band from that time, and they were just as popular as those bands. In fact, I think Rat holds up better than most of Motley Crue's albums, to be honest with you. I mean, Motley Crue is the king of excuse me, is the king of albums padding with filler and stuff after Shout at the Devil. When you listen to
Right.
Theater of Pain and also Girls, Girls, Girls.
Yeah. And until Dr. Feelgood is when they kind of got their
Exactly.
shit together and
Exactly.
put together a real consistent album. But
Yep.
and also Stephen Pearcy had that type of voice where he didn't blow it out, so he could still, from what I hear and see on YouTube, he still sounds great. He's
Yeah.
67 now, according to
He still
Wikipedia.
sounds good. I mean, not to make fun of anybody, but you hear what Vince Neil sounds like now, and then you compare it to Stephen Pearcy, and there's really no comparison. I mean, I'm also a huge fan of Paul Stanley, but I think Paul Stanley's even admitted he had throat problems and surgeries and stuff. So his vocals towards the end of Kiss weren't as strong as, say, the 70s or 80s. I mean, 80s was when Paul Stanley was at his peak,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but even though I mean, Kiss in the 70s is really my favorite Kiss, but
You know,
anyway, Stephen
well,
Pearcy I think sounds good still alive.
yeah, I'm really interested though in hearing what this Motley Crue music is going to sound like with John Five on guitar. They're recording an album.
They are, yeah.
Really interested in that. The other thing is John Bon Jovi was another guy whose voice really went downhill, but he's been talking recently about he there was an issue, there was something that he had to go under the knife for.
He did, he did. Which,
Yeah,
I give him credit for going public with that because he doesn't have
sure.
to go public. I mean,
But at
Bon
least it
Jovi
answers the
out
question,
stating,
like what the hell happened? I
right,
mean,
yeah.
because
It's weird because some people have throat problems. I mean, I know like Robert Plant in the early 70s had like a secret throat operate or procedure after I think the Houses of the Holy tour that people that kind of got swept under the rug. And I know there's like people on YouTube and on the internet which they do a comparison and like Robert Plant's voice was never as stellar as it was prior to that.
yeah.
But that's just part of the human body, and just the human voice is a very fickle thing. Everyone's different.
So we know though, if Rat were to get back together for one last tour, I don't think we could. They could maybe do small arenas with a solid opening act, maybe. But I get this, just my question is why weren't they bigger than they felt they should have been? Right? I mean, in '85 they reached the
Yeah.
peak, but like they say, just it just that there were missteps along the way, or they rushed through albums because they really should have been bigger than they were,
Well, I mean, they
as
were
big as
pretty
they
big.
were. But
I mean, in that 84, 80, definitely 85, they were in the top five metal bands here in the States. What's funny
yeah,
is though, Rat is one of those bands that they never were as big outside of, well, not they were big in Japan, I know. They were probably big in also Canada because Canada and also the US seem to have the same tastes. but they were never as popular in Europe and also in England. In fact, they didn't do a proper tour of England, I believe, until the end of the Invasion of Your Privacy tour cycle. They opened up a string of dates for Ozzy. What's
Okay.
funny is Ozzy started his Ultimate Sin tour in Europe with Ratt opening up. Then he comes to America with the band Metallica opening up on the Master of Puppets tour.
Yeah.
That's totally opposite ends of kind of metal at that point. We have the glam metal and then we have the back to basics thrash metal right there.
Yeah. I just think, man, they had that Dr. Feelgood album in them. If they had really just gotten that focus, maybe. But hey,
Yeah,
like you say,
maybe.
they were huge, man. I remember. I
Yeah.
just feel like they should. I listen to their music, and like you say, it just holds up so well. And I just feel like they're just.
You know who would have helped them? Mike Klink in the late 80s probably would have helped them as
Yeah.
a producer because he was one of the few producers that was doing hard rock metal albums that was not doing the horrible cannon drum sound and like the overprocessed and all the, when you listen to certain 80s metal and hard rock or really pop metal type stuff, it just sounds so dated that you listen to Appetite for Destruction. It does sound a little bit like the 80s, but it's more a throwback to the 70s or maybe like I know because I've interviewed Mike Klink in the past that Guns N' Roses on Appetite for Destruction wanted a Aerosmith sound from the 70s.
Yeah, and it
Go
does
on
have
there.
a great sound to it. Oh, but by the way, speaking of Aerosmith, where Rat used to get they used to get teased for being a Aerosmith ripoff, and then Joe Perry said something really cool to the guys. I think backstage after a show, right?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book that there were two bands that early in their career Rat was compared to a lot. It seemed like almost every article in Circus and Hit Parader, they would get a comparison. They were either compared to 70s era Aerosmith, or they were compared to as well Motley Crue. But I don't think Rat was anything like Motley Crue personally. They were just both popular at the same time, came from the same, location. I guess maybe similar production, but yeah, I think that there's a difference. And Aerosmith and Rat, I don't think that I know that Rat covered the song "Walking the Dog," which also Aerosmith covered. But besides that, I don't really hear too much. Like Rat never really got that bluesy. I guess not Walking the Dog. I guess Way Cool Jr. with that
Yeah,
beginning guitar part was kind of bluesy, but
right,
never really got as bluesy as like Train Kept a Rolling or anything like that.
right. No, I think they just had a sound all their own. It's just that groove. They had a killer groove on those tunes, and it's great. This book, I'm sure, will also help to bring more attention to them for anybody who's kind of maybe new to the 80s music. They really Rat is one of those like must listens, I think, and
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
the thing too, what you said about like, how come they can't get back together? Really, it's a shame they can't because since maybe the late 80s or early 90s, I would say Rat is probably like there's more, I think there's a wide variety of people that want to go see Rat now because Rat through Spotify
And
and also
Stranger Things, right?
yeah, and also their music was in Stranger Things and also Cobra Kai had
Cobra Kai.
two
Yep.
Rat songs, so they reached a whole new audience as well. So yeah, it's just a shame that you think that they should have put aside their differences if they would have done the stadium tour and promoted the box set with the stadium tour. And then this year is the 40-year anniversary of Out of the Cellar, so if they could have just put aside their differences and just did this one last tour, they probably could have cashed in
Yeah, that box set came out when? Within the
last year,
last. Okay. All
almost
right.
exactly 1 year ago.
And that box set, what's in that? Are there rarities? Are there things that
Yeah, what it is, it's every album. It's all their albums on Atlantic. It's from Invasion of Your Privacy through Detonator, with a single that has a song "Nobody Rides for Free." And the only thing though was they really should have put the EP in there, but they didn't because the EP at one point was reissued through Atlantic. So I don't know if it was like a licensing issue of maybe the rights reverted back to Marshall Burl or what the story is with that. But yeah, I mean, to me, the EP is Rat's best thing. It's kind of a shame that
yeah.
that wasn't included.
Yeah. Well, the book is out now, right? World Infestation, the Ratt Story.
Exactly.
It's out now, so people can find it wherever books are sold.
Yep.
And where can people find you online, Greg? All the
Well,
usual
I was going to say,
places.
Probably the best place to find the book is Amazon. It's available as Kindle, paperback, hardcover, or if you want to hear my beautiful Long Island accent, it's also available as an audiobook narrated by me.
Yes. And by the way, you did send a copy to Mr. Stephen Piercy. So you just
Yeah,
sent him.
yeah.
That's
It's true. I
cool.
did send a copy of the book to Stephen Piercy. I'm curious to see what he thinks of it. Hopefully he enjoys it. But
I'm sure he will.
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure he
And
will.
if people want to check out what I'm up to, because I write for a bunch of websites and magazines, always doing books. If you want to go to Twitter or X, what is it? Is it Twitter or
It's,
X now?
I go with X.
Okay.
I go
Yeah.
with X.
I actually still go with Twitter, but X is easier, right?
Yeah, I had to change like on my website, bookdownrock.com. It's like I had to change Twitter to all the places where I had Twitter. I'm like, okay,
Right.
X.
Well, anyway, if you go to twitter.com or x.com/Greg Prato Writer, that's GregPrato Writer. I'm always posting my latest articles and interviews. I just interviewed Buck Dharma from
From Blue
Blue
Oyster
Oyster
Cult.
Cult.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they got a new single out and an album coming out.
they have a new album coming out, and the album's very good. What it is they found a lot of songs that were never finished. They were like demoed or leftover songs from the late 70s, early 80s. They went back and finished them off, and it's like a long lost Blue Oyster Cult album from that era. It's actually very strong and also very good.
That's
It's
cool.
called it's called Ghost Stories.
Okay. And you've contributed a lot of great stuff to the Van Halen news desk. And the last one, you just did one on David Lee Roth's Skyscraper.
Yes, that's true.
And
Yeah.
and we should make note because the guys from the DLR cast, Darren Paltrowitz and Steve Roth, mentioned that. They talked about it in their last episode.
Oh, nice. Oh,
And
I had to go
yeah,
check that out.
yeah,
Yeah,
how
what it
that
is I do a lot of news articles for the Ultimate Guitar site. So what it is they're kind
ultimate-guitar.com.
yes, yeah, and they're kind enough to let me for columns and features sometimes do excerpts from my books because I've done close to 40 books if you could believe that.
Yeah, man, that's all. And I read your very first one, Blind
Yep,
Melon,
exactly. Thank you
Shannon
very
Hoon
much.
book.
Yeah,
Yep,
called A Devil on One Shoulder, an Angel on the Other, the Shannon
yep.
Hoon story. But yeah, so I was able to do a article recently from quotes from my book called Shredders, and it was quotes from Billy Sheehan talking about how Skyscraper he thinks that that was pretty much David Lee Roth trying to merge rock with disco or dance.
Dance, yeah. But the thing is, like, and if you give DLR Cast a listen, that episode, they brought up a good point. I think the only song that you can dance to is Stand Up.
I don't think it was really dance. I think it was
But
more like new wave,
pop,
like keyboard pop kind of.
right.
Which I don't know. I mean, again, David Lee
I
Roth has
love
done so.
Skyscraper.
See, you know what it is? If it did not come right after Eat 'em and Smile, I think is front to back phenomenal.
Yeah.
Besides Van Halen, I don't think there's any comparison that's David Lee Roth. I mean, all the Van Halen albums are at the top of Mount Everest. Right below it is Eat 'em and Smile
Yep.
for
Yep.
me. But the fact that he would have just done such a about face, and if you do a song for song comparison to Eat 'em and Smile, I just don't think it's as strong. It's not as rocking. It's not. It's just too dated sounding. I mean, I'm sure if you heard some of Eat 'em and Smile, it's probably dated too. But just
I don't
like,
know. I don't think. I mean,
okay,
maybe
maybe not. Then maybe not.
going crazy has a little bit of synth in there, but
And it also just Eat 'em and Smile sound like you could hear the band really gelling and.
yeah, yeah.
I
And
don't know. David Lee Roth just, on one side I want to kiss him on the cheek, the other side I want to wring his neck because, I mean,
that's the
how many
quote of
times?
the episode.
Yeah, I mean, because just to leave Van Halen when he
I
left, just
know.
when they were going to become the U.S. Led Zeppelin, and then he manages to pull off the impossible and put together a band that I think was on par or at least close to Van Halen, and then he just
I know.
it just
But
breaks it up and
as we
does
know, like to
yeah.
this day, there's a lot of head scratcher things that he'll do, and I don't think he likes to do the same thing twice. So Skyscraper,
But
yeah. And the
but
funny thing is, like, he was always against Jump, the keyboards with Eddie, and
right.
then Skyscraper's like, you know,
But then what I don't understand is then he
synth
goes
heavy.
what I don't understand is he goes from Skyscraper and then he tries to go back to kind of a more rock Eat 'em
A
and
little
Smile
ain't
thing
enough.
with yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that album to this day I've never listened to. I'll be honest with
Really?
you.
Really? Okay. Did
Which
you know
I
Bob
mean,
Ezrin was supposed to produce that at first?
yep,
Yeah.
yep,
And
yep.
then
I
Bob
found
Rock.
that out.
Yeah.
I found that out. But just at that point, around that era, I was a huge Steve Vai fan, and I love Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan together. So at that point, I was just over it, and I
Yeah.
just couldn't really stomach. Although, I mean, I do appreciate Jason Becker and, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah,
But
everything.
with
But yeah,
Skyscraper, it's like Billy was underutilized, like even on Just Like Paradise. And I love Just Like Paradise, but I was just listening to it the other day, listen closely. And I'm like, there's no way if Billy's playing bass on that, he did it with he did it in his sleep because
yeah.
even though I think it's a
Yeah.
synth bass, it sounds like a synth bass line. It's not, it doesn't sound like Billy at all.
What I don't
Yeah.
understand is how come David Lee Roth couldn't have just given Billy Sheehan like one or two songs or say, look,
Right.
Billy, do whatever you want on these two songs, like play your ass off, I don't care. But all these other songs, we're going to do, the stuff that but he didn't,
And he
you know.
didn't. He didn't. So, well, anyway, that's for another discussion. We'll have a whole
It is.
nother. Yeah, we could talk Van
Have me
Halen
on
and
next
Dave all the
month to
time.
maybe really get into
Yeah.
this.
Hey, we got the Alex Van Halen book, man. That's the big.
Oh,
Oh my God, that's the big
I
news.
already put in a request to see if Alex Van Halen is doing interviews in support of this book.
Yes. Oh my God,
So
I
we'll
hope
see. We'll see
so.
if I can
Oh, I
interview him for
hope
one of
so.
the sites I write for.
Absolutely, man. That would be so
That'd be
cool.
great to
So
interview him.
cool. But the Ratt Story, World Infestation, the Ratt Story is out now. That's the book to get. And Greg, we'll have you back on soon, I am sure. What do you have coming up next? 90s fans have something to look
Yes,
forward
I
to.
have a book that I'm working on. I can't give away too much because I don't want, I just want people to always be on their toes. But
Yep.
it is a style of music in the 90s, not grunge, but a style of music in the 90s that was very, very popular.
Ooh, teaser. The
You know what?
teaser. What?
I'm just going to come out. I'm just going to tell you what it is.
Okay.
Backstreet Boys.
Wow. And
Yeah.
that one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. And then In Sync.
Yes.
That's the next one.
Yes. No, but
Oh my.
honestly, it is a 90s rock style.
When's it coming out?
Well, I'm still in the stage of doing interviews for it.
Okay.
So I'm still at that stage. Hopefully, I'll be wrapping it up in the near future. That stage of the book process, putting it together and then shopping it around. So hopefully 2025. I'm looking forward to
All
this book.
right. All right. Well, keep me posted. We'll have you back on to talk about it. Greg, thanks, man. As always, always love having you on.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.